What would happen if we had a third arm? What would we feel if we could use it like with our normal arms? To answer this weird question, we have to start from this very fascinating video, which showed incredible results from Johns Hopkins University. In the video, a quadriplegic patient was able to control 2 robotic arms with his thoughts and feed himself dessert, all through a brain-computer interface, specifically electrodes implanted in the brain. The results are already impressive per se, and if you want to check the video, you can check it in the description. But researchers would like to go even further and provide sensory feedback from the robotic limbs to allow the patient to feel the touch of the limbs. That is, they would like the patient to have a fully functional new arm. Now, this device is meant for people with disabilities, people that have little to no control over the movement of their arms. And of course, the purpose of this device is to bypass the injury and allow them to manipulate the world around them. But what if we use the same technology, robotic arms connected to the brain, to allow healthy people to increase their capabilities? To really understand this issue, we have to basically split it into 2 parts. First one is control and the second one is feedback. Now, talking about control, we have to start from movement. How does movement happen? At a very high level, it happens basically like this. It all starts in the motor cortex, that is a specific region of the brain. Here the brain plans and initiates the movement, and instructions that are neuronal impulses are transmitted through the spinal cord and relayed to the muscles. The muscles contract and movement happens, as we all know. But via a brain-computer interface, as the one seen in the video, neuronal impulses are detected by electrodes and devices which are either implanted in the brain or positioned on the head. So basically, they're detected and they're sent as signals to a specific computer, they're converted in commands for the robotic arms, and they allow the patient or the person to control a device just by thinking about movement. Basically, thinking about moving a hand, for example the right hand, the same neuronal impulses they can be used to move a robotic hand. This is fairly straightforward, although it's not easy at all, because while it's straightforward to understand basically the process, to actually detect the signals from the brain and transmit them to an external device is not an easy task at all. But even more fascinating is the feedback part, that is actually feeling the arm. So if we provide a healthy person, with a robotic arm, how does it feel? Because, of course, for a person with a disability, this is not an issue. This person has basically little to no feedback, but for a healthy person, how does it work to have an additional limb? Technically speaking, when we talk about feeling, we have to refer to the somatosensory system. The somatosensory system is part of a nervous system, and it's basically involved with perception of things like touch, temperature, or vibration. This system includes different types of receptors that are located all over our body. Receptors are specific types of cells, and they're meant to perceive the stimuli and provide this information to the brain. For example, touch. When I touch, for example, with my finger in my hand, I'm exerting pressure on my hand, but as a consequence, I'm also exerting pressure on my finger. This pressure is a mechanical phenomenon, and this pressure is detected by specific receptors called Mechanoreceptors. These Mechanoreceptors convert this mechanical signal into an electrical signal that is then transported into the brain, and specific areas of the brain that process this information and allow us to feel the finger and to feel the touch. Now, talking about the brain, maybe some of you have already seen this abomination. It's called a cortical homunculus. It's basically a distorted representation of how the different parts of the human body are mapped to the brain. It is called distorted because it is based on how many receptors are present in a specific area. For example, hands and fingers are full of receptors because, of course, they are meant to manipulate objects and they're meant to provide a lot of feedback. So they have more receptors and they're represented in the homunculus as being bigger. And as you can see, the cortex has areas for processing information coming from fingers, toes, mouth, and so on. So from all the areas of the body that are equipped with receptors. Now, this is all fine as long as we have 2 hands and 2 arms. But what if we had additional limbs? How would the brain manage all this additional information? Now, having multiple arms or multiple fingers is not impossible in nature. It is actually a condition. In particular, there are 2 conditions. Polymelia means having multiple limbs, or polydactyly means having multiple fingers in addition to the natural ones. There are people who are born with these conditions. It is a rare occurrence, but it happens. But usually for these people, these additional limbs or fingers are not fully functional. So they're basically called malformations because usually they're not functional. But sometimes there are rare occurrences where people, in fact, are capable of using their additional, for example, fingers. In a 2019 study, researchers observed how people with polydactyly may exhibit increased mobility, with additional fingers being able to move independently. The results showed that for these two patients that were studied in the study, these two patients showed specific muscles, nerves, and brain regions for the additional fingers. These two patients had 6 fingers per hand, so basically one additional finger, and they had specific basically tissues. So not only the patients were able to control the 6th finger independently, but we were also able to receive feedback and information from it, because they had a so-called mental representation of the fingers. That is, following a tactile clue on the additional finger, they were able to perceive the position of the finger, which is something that for everybody is normal. For example, when you touch my middle finger, I recognize that is my middle finger because I have a correct mental representation of my own body and the position of all my limbs. That is called basically getting a feedback about something that is touching or anyway exerting something over your body. So for these people, their brains were correctly capable of mapping all the additional functions for the additional fingers without any issues, basically, even if it is additional workload, let's say, because our brains, of course, are meant for 10 fingers and 2 arms, because this is how we evolved, but for these people, having 6 fingers per hand was not an issue. Now, you might wonder, sure, but 6 fingers per hand is not like having an additional robotic arm, it's not the same thing. And you would be right, of course, there are 2 main issues that we have to tackle. The first one is more obvious, and it is that an arm is obviously more complex than a finger. The study showed that brains of people with polydactyly were capable of accommodating without issues the additional workload of having extra fingers. But what about an entire extra arm? That seems really complex. An arm is of course bigger than a finger and it has more degrees of freedom. It has a shoulder, an elbow, a wrist. There is much more information to be managed. But this complexity is also increased due to the second fact, and it is that people with polydactyly are born this way. They are born with 6 fingers per hand or any fingers additional per hand. They're born this way, so their brains have managed to adapt to this new situation. But for a healthy, normal person, so a person born with 2 hands and 10 fingers, having an additional robotic arm, it's something that of course can take a toll on the brain potentially. Because if you have to link this additional robotic arm to the brain, of course you have to take into consideration how you want to map the information. So not only how you want to control your robot arm, but how also you want to manage all the information that is coming from it, because information can come from a robotic arm. For example, there are studies on using artificial skin or robotic limbs, either for robots or for humans. So basically to have an artificial replication of human skin that can provide feedback like our skin provides feedback with receptors. But once the receptors have captured the information, so if my robotic arm is touching something, what happens to this information? Where does it go? Does it feel like if I'm touching something with my robotic hand right index finger, does it feel like my actual right hand index finger? Or what if, for example, I have 2 right arms, because of course I have my healthy right arm and my robotic right arm. What if I'm touching different objects? What would happen? These questions are actually complicated questions, and honestly I don't have right now an answer to them, because it all depends on how we want to map this information to our brain. Do we want to map this information to the actually same regions, same brain regions? Basically, it will mean that if we touch something with our robotic right hand, it will mean as touching something with our actual right hand. But what if we provide feedback in a different way? I don't know for the moment. These are questions for the roboticists. But the researchers who have studied people with polydactyly, the researchers of the study that I mentioned, have actually said that their study to them is the starting point for the roboticists to work on robotic limbs. And maybe this study will provide more vital force to research in this area, and from helping people with disabilities to move objects, we will also come, maybe in the future, to providing to healthy people additional capabilities via additional arms, because after all, who would not like an additional robotic arm? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you would actually like to have an additional third robotic arm or not, and how would you make it work? If you like this video, check out also my other videos on brain-computer interfaces. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.